First, let's give a nod to the local Evenki people. Agda. Akulina, an Evenki woman who was roughly 20 miles from the epicenter at the time of the explosion, tells scientists, "A brilliant outburst of light blinded us. The wind was breaking trees like they were sticks. As a rising whirlwind lifted us off the ground, I lost consciousness." After she wakes up, she remembers seeing her husband, Ivan, being lifted up by a wind blast and slammed into one of the remaining upright trees 130 feet from the remnants of the camp that they had been sleeping in. Ivan dies a few hours later from fractures, shock, and blood loss. Akolino also reports, "Our reindeers also vanished, and we haven't found them since." The shamans of the Evenki tribe, who have lived in the area for thousands of years, claim the Tunguska event was caused by Agda, the god of thunder himself. Not that god of thunder, who was upset by their tribal disputes. They say Agda sent demons with shining eyes and fiery tails to punish the disobedient Evenki men. I know this one is really hard to believe, but it is notable for the fact that immediately after the event, the area was declared sacred and a forbidden zone by Evenki tribesmen, who then reportedly either chased out or killed dozens of Soviet scientific expeditions that ventured into the area for decades after. Black hole. Most people are familiar with the idea of a black hole, a gigantic area of space where the gravitational pull is so strong that nothing, not even light, can escape. These matter-devouring machines are thought to be created by the explosion of a star, but not all of them are of the monster variety. Some have theorized that at the time of the Big Bang, small black holes were also produced, called primordial black holes. And I mean small, like the size of a hydrogen atom small. And that these little matter-eating monsters, unlike their big brothers, are not gravitationally tied to anything, so spend their days free-falling through the universe. And how does this relate to Tunguska? Well, in 1973, two scientists, Albert A. Jackson and Michael P. Ryan, float the theory that one day one of these primordial black holes just happens to come free-falling our way on a direct collision course with Earth. If that were the case, as it starts plowing through our atmosphere, it would be gobbling up any molecules of anything it encounters along the way: oxygen, nitrogen, carbon dioxide. This gobbling process creates lots of heat and energy, so it would look like a bright glowing mass as it moves through the sky. And once it hits the Earth's surface, it wouldn't stop like an impact. It would keep moving through like a hot knife through butter. But the energy it would produce along the way would be great enough to create that shock wave and the seismic rumble. Pretty neat theory. The only problem is that the black hole would also exit the Earth. Precisely where would depend on the angle of entry, but based on the shape of the blast pattern in the trees, it's theorized that it would have come out somewhere in the North Atlantic Ocean. But no reports of anything amiss were ever reported. And unless researchers uncover a pillar of glass burrowing into the ground in the Tunguska region where the energy of the black hole would have melted the soil, I think we have to call this one purely hypothetical. Antimatter and a UFO explosion. These two theories are quite different from each other, but hang with me and you'll see why I put them together. First, the exploding UFO theory. In 1945, a science fiction writer named Alexander Kazantsev visits the ruins of Hiroshima, which we know was devastated by a nuclear explosion. Near the explosion's epicenter, he noticed still standing tree trunks with their leaves and branches ripped off by the sheer force of the shockwave. 6 years later, Alexander visits Tunguska, where he notices similar patterns. No crater, standing trees without any branches or leaves, and the trees still standing, more charring on the side closest to the impact. So he quickly comes to a conclusion. The Tunguska event had to be caused by a massive explosion, probably of nuclear origin. A bit of a leap, but okay. But what would cause that? Nuclear weapons are a long way off. So, being the sci-fi writer that he is, Kazantsev develops his theory that the blast was caused by a UFO whose nuclear-powered propulsion system must have malfunctioned and exploded. And in 1956, he writes his famous short novel titled The Explosion, where he lays out his own explanation about the true cause of the Tunguska explosion. Now, I would think that if this were indeed the case, that there would be evidence left behind. The chances of the explosion completely vaporizing everything are pretty slim. There should still be some traces of some foreign metal left on the ground, which there isn't. But amazingly enough, that's not what brings this theory down. Which brings us to the other idea, that of an antimatter explosion. In 1941, an American astronomer from the University of New Mexico, who might be known to some as one of the military investigators of the Roswell, New Mexico UFO crash in 1947, Lincoln La Paz. Total side note, Lincoln then had a UFO sighting of his own with his family just 2 days after the crash at Roswell. Anyway, Lincoln tosses out an idea that perhaps the explosion was the result of a glob of antimatter hitting the Earth. Antimatter is like the mirror opposite of matter. So when the two meet, they effectively cancel each other out, releasing huge amounts of energy in various forms. So the idea is that this big glob of antimatter comes barreling into the Earth's atmosphere, being canceled out by matter as it drops, creating the fireball, until it finally hits the matter on the ground and releases the rest of its energy. Now forget for a moment that it seems like such a release of energy would cause an impact crater of some sort. The real downfall of this theory is neutrinos. Neutrinos are one of the many things generated by the cancellation of matter by antimatter. And where else are neutrinos created? Nuclear explosions. Which brings us to this guy, Dr. Willard Libby, a Nobel Prize-winning scientist whose specialty is anything atomic, including the fallout, and especially carbon dating. That is measuring the amount of carbon-14 in an object. Carbon-14 is a radioactive isotope with a predictable decay rate. So the less carbon-14 something has, the older it is. But I digress. When a hailstorm of neutrinos hits the air, like in a nuclear explosion, or when matter and antimatter cancel each other out, the result is the creation of a ton of extra carbon-14 in the air.
But you see, the trees record the composition of the atmosphere because they grow from the atmosphere.
We can establish if there is ever a rise in the relative atmospheric levels of carbon. Dr. Willard and his team had already run the same kind of carbon-14 test on trees from the blast areas of other nuclear test sites. So they already knew that the rise in carbon-14 in the tree rings did indeed happen. So they did the same carbon testing on the Tunguska trees. Result?
That there was no antimatter involved at all. Nor was there any hydrogen bomb, nor was there any atomic bomb, nor was there anything else, atomic or nuclear.
So, with one simple test, we are able to knock out both the exploding UFO and antimatter theories. The death ray. This theory is a little less well known, but I think it's my favorite only because I love Nikola Tesla. Starting as far back as the 1890s, Tesla had theorized and experimented on the possibility of wireless power transmission. He wanted to wirelessly power the world for free. How can you not love the guy? In 1901, he finally obtains the financing and the property to build his 187-foot tall wireless transmission tower on Long Island, which would become known as Wardenclyffe. Long story short, by 1908, financing has dried up and creditors are calling, and Nikola is getting desperate. He needs a miracle or a spectacle. And it just so happens that he is friends with one Robert Peary, the first person to reach the North Pole. Peary didn't achieve that honor until April of 1909, but in June of 1908, as he's about to depart from New York on his way to the Arctic Circle, Tesla tells him to keep his eye open when he gets there for a little demonstration. Presumably, the idea is that Tesla will aim the wireless power transmitter at the North Pole so that when Peary and his team get there, they will see the aftermath of a great explosion. And up there, what else would it be from but Tesla's power beam? Peary reportedly never saw any signs of destruction. But maybe that's because they weren't there. If you draw a straight line from Long Island through the North Pole and keep going, what do you hit? Tunguska! Is it possible that his test was partially a success? That the death ray, as it's called, did deliver the immense amount of energy required to cause a 15 megaton explosion in another part of the world, but that he just overshot his target? Knowing the genius that guy was, I certainly wouldn't put it past him.